Hey guys, welcome to Nerdarchy. For nerds, by nerds, hanging out with
This nerd. I'm Ted.
And today we're going to be doing another edition of What Does Your Class Say About You? This time we're going to talk about the Barbarian.
Jump down to the description below, sign up for the Nerdarchy newsletter. It's a great way to get gaming tips and learn how to game with Nerdarchy.
So, in this series, we like to talk about the different classes and how they shape the personality and the role-playing style that you're probably going to use when you play these, or, at least suggestions anyway.
So the Barbarian, there's so many different things that jump into your head, and it doesn't necessarily have to... it doesn't have to necessarily dictate exactly where you come from. So if I take the class Barbarian, most people assume, well, that's a background. You grew up savage. You grew up, in nature. You're not a civilized type of situation. But it can go the other way. What happens if you grew up like play a noble barbarian? You grew up in a city. You went through all of this, but something in you snapped one day, and you learned how to harness some kind of internal power, and when you enter combat, you just don't care about anything else.
So that's almost like a reskin of the Barbarian features, right? Mm-hmm. So the only thing where that gets a little bit wonky is when you get into like their ritual casting. Mm-hmm. So they, you can totally just ignore them. Mm-hmm. But I don't think anybody really likes to sack out any of their stuff, or maybe you trade it out for something else.
But what I was getting at is when you're a barbarian, when you enter combat, you're not thinking. Your thoughts are blocked behind this wall of rage and frustration, and you're taking it out on whatever's in front of you.
Well, yeah, no, I know what you're saying. I mean, you could even go another route with like the dervish, mm-hmm. Where you play a character that is actually so skilled that their blades are never stopping, and the reason why they take half damage from most attacks is they're actually deflecting them.
They're parrying.
And you could totally reskin things, but and that changes it. Again, Barbarian. It's weird because Barbarian is, as a class, it's also a cultural thing.
Yes.
But like, here's the thing too. Like, not all tribesmen, savages, Vikings, whatever. Not all of them are actually barbarians. Not all of them berserk.
Right.
Like, there is a lot of literature and stories where they use Viking and Viking-esque societies that have berserkers, but the berserkers are almost like outcasts within their own society. Like, they're the crazy ones. Mm-hmm. They're depending on the style, like they're taking drugs before they go to war and doing all this crazy stuff to psych themselves out. And so normal people of their society don't even really want to associate with them. It is of one variation.
Right.
If you're looking at more modern characters, if you look at Wolverine, who goes savage and berserk, would be like a barbarian.
Absolutely.
No one's going to even know what I'm talking about, but Sasquatch from Alpha Flight,
I know,
was a character that would occasionally freak out and go into bestial rage. So there's different reasons why you can have that rage ability. But now if we just pull it back a little bit and look at like the other parts of the barbarian and culture and society as to what that's going to say. Like, we've seen a lot of different iterations of this character throughout all the literature and different stories we've read. Mm-hmm. You had Riverwind from Dragonlance.
Yep.
Who, although he was a barbarian, he never really struck me as someone that has having like barbarian levels.
Right.
He was a fierce warrior, mm-hmm. but he didn't fight like a barbarian.
He fought like a fighter.
Mm-hmm. And he was reserved, quiet, and stoic. But he would have been like a fighter with the background of Outlander,
Right?
Pretty
Yeah.
much. But then you have characters. Then you have characters like Conan, who, let's face it, like the Barbarian class
Is Conan.
is based off of Conan, right? The idea is, he grew up in with uncivilized people, taken slave all of his life. He finally, breaks free of his bondage, and then he takes that savagery and berserkness with him. And if you think about the character of Conan, like, even though I've read the books, I've read different books, I still can't help but think of the movies with Arnold Schwarzenegger, like as iconic Conan,
absolutely.
with him pushing the wheel for 10 years. So like if you look at that example of a barbarian, like, it's not just, for him, it wasn't just a matter of being born of a certain society. He was made, he was forged, because he spent all that time in slavery and isolation, which is definitely going to do some harmful psychological things to a person. Even the people that he was around, he just kind of watched them die because they couldn't push the wheel as good as him. That wheel was a mother. And then from there, he's taken out of that environment and placed into fighting pits,
Right?
Where he excels because he's stronger than everyone else.
Because he pushed that freaking wheel for 10 years.
He pushed that wheel for 10 years. And, not only that, he's a little crazy. He's got the ability to snap in combat and just destroy whatever's in front of him. And then, from there, he moves beyond the fighting pits into being a free man. He then has to, then he has to reconcile that past with his future and what kind of person he's going to become and be. But that, those fires of rage still burn within him. So Conan was actually he was a savage. He was
A gladiator.
He was a slave. He was a thief. So he used all those skill sets to do different things.
And don't forget, he was the barbarian and the destroyer.
Well, there was that too, and eventually the king. But so he had this long journey that essentially shaped him. Like, you could go, like, it would be so hard to pick a background for that character.
Yeah,
like if we were D&Di's and Conan, like, because he definitely has the gladiator entertainer variant. I don't know which one you would use for slave. Whether you'd like look at Urchin or one of the other ones. I don't think there is a good background for just saying you were a slave.
I think they moved away from that concept because of how touchy it is right now.
Political. Maybe we'll make that background, but the point is, like, that's just one example of a story arc of a barbarian and all these different factors that affected him, right? So, and also, like, the other examples of barbarians that aren't necessarily barbarians because of society, but because of something else. So when you're creating your persona for that character, you have to look at it, is he a noble warrior from the wilderness? Or another good example of a character that I could definitely see being the totem variation of the barbarian is Tarzan.
Oh, absolutely, yeah.
And is there?
He's not civilized in any way, shape, or form. That makes.
But he's not actually a barbarian, right? He's not. Society-wise, he was actually a nobleman.
Oh, absolutely.
Who was lost in the jungle and raised by apes.
Well, this is where he starts off with the Outlander background, and through role playing, he earns the noble background.
Is that how it works?
That's how that comes to light that he really was this person. So he gets these other benefits.
For some reason, I don't think so. I think they still looked at him as a freak. And he went back to the jungle. There's a reason. He just didn't do well. But no, it's another example of how you would play that character. For one, he limited verbal.
Yep.
Felt more comfortable with animals than he did with people. He had the ability to go apeshit when he needed to. Yeah. It ain't easy fighting crocodiles with like a pocket knife. You need something going on there. And Tarzan is, to me, like the most extreme example of a barbarian. When you are really just like a hair's breadth from actually being an animal, you don't get much more barbaric than that.
I would agree.
But on the other side of that, like, you could build a character that lives amongst his tribe and is a nobleman within his tribe, you know, but he's part of the, within that culture, he's part of like a inner society of berserkers where, it's a sect of warriors in their culture that, have this ability to kind of freak out or abandon all fear, or whatever the tenets are.
Right.
To an extent, it could almost be like their paladin,
Right.
Their sacred warriors that not everyone has the ability to do. So
I mean, like, there's a couple options of how you can, change up your barbarian. You've, like you said, you've got the ability to just be like, all right, there's something in you that you just unlock this rage. You could totally use the D&D's I interact with an object and take some kind of potion or sniff or whatever
right, munch on some peyote.
That's going to allow you to do this rage thing, or as we said early in the beginning of the video, forget the whole barbaric side of it and just
raging takes a bonus action. So I as the DM, what I would do is, like, if you have something that makes you go, like, that's the bonus action, whatever it is that you have to do.
Yeah. So, but then the other thing is, you could proclaim it as the dervish, and your actual fighting skill is the quote unquote rage, and you're just reskinning that concept, and as you learn to improve.
But when you do that, you're not really a barbarian at all, in how the character would be played.
Visually, you're not a barbarian. Mechanically, you are. And it just, so there's different ways to
well,
change
my point
up.
is, from looking at it from a cultural aspect or from a society, you wouldn't have to be from a society where that, you would expect a barbarian to be from.
Right.
Also, the other example that a lot of you are going to be familiar with would be Wolfgar. I mean, he's the case of the barbarian that gets taken into the well, actually not even that young. I mean, he was like,
he was a young teenager.
Yeah, mid young,
9 to 13 somewhere. And I mean, he was on the battlefield. So I mean, it's like,
yeah. Well, I don't think he's in his tweens. So I definitely think he's older than that, but a teenager, we'll say. But an example of someone who's lived as a barbarian, or in a primitive society, up until their teens, and then gets basically taken as an indentured servant into a dwarven hold.
Right.
But at his core, he's still barbarian. He just kind of gets domesticated and civilized. So, but it's an interesting take on the barbarian.
Right.
And it forms a different kind of person. You go from living in a primitive society to a more civilized society. But not only that, it's a civilized society that isn't of your own people. They're not human. They're dwarves.
Right.
You go from living underneath on the tundra under the open sky to living underground in a hole, basically. And then your weapons master, who you get stuck with, happens to be a dark elf. So. And the weird, it's even further weird is that your kind of like adoptive sister is human as well,
right?
But completely different than you.
Right.
So it's like all these little factors that kind of build.
She's physically a human, but personality,
she's more like a dwarf. Right. Yeah. So there's a ton of different ways that you can use your class, the barbarian, to inform how you play your character. The first thing to understand is what kind of society does that character come from, and you can build out from there, either making it a very norm for that sort of society with your character, or going the opposite direction. But either way, it's still going to inform your character choices when it comes to role playing and building the personality of that character.
Absolutely. So, what do you guys think? What makes a barbarian a barbarian? Put your thoughts down below. While you're at it, like, share, even subscribe.
You can check us out over at Nerdarchy.com.
So until next time,
stay nerdy.
The other way. What happens if you grew up like play a noble barbarian? You grew up in a city. You went through all of this, but something in you snapped one day, and you learned how to harness some kind of internal power, And when you enter combat, you just don't care about anything else.
So that's almost like a reskin of the Barbarian features, right?
In front of you.
Well, yeah, no, I know what you're saying. I mean, you could even go another route with like the Dervish, where you play a character that is actually so skilled that their blades are never stopping, and the reason why they take half damage from most attacks is they're actually deflecting them.
They're parrying.
And you could totally reskin things, but that changes it. Again, Barbarian. It's weird because Barbarian is, as a class, is also so. The only thing where that gets a little bit wonky is when you get into like their ritual casting. So they, I mean, you can totally just ignore them. But I don't think anybody really likes to sack out any of their stuff, or maybe you trade it out for something else.
But what I was getting at is when you're a barbarian, when you enter combat, you're not thinking. Your thoughts are blocked behind this wall of rage and frustration, and you're taking it out on whatever.
Hey guys, welcome to Nerdarchy. 4 nerds, by nerds, hanging out with
this nerd. I'm Ted.
And today we're going to be doing another edition of What Does Your Class Say About You? This time we're going to talk about the Barbarian.
Jump down to the description below, sign up for the Nerdarchy newsletter. It's a great way to get gaming tips and learn how to game with Nerdarchy.
So, in this series, we like to talk about the different classes and how they shape the personality and the role-playing style that you're probably going to use when you play these, or, at least suggestions anyway.
So, the Barbarian, there's so many different things that jump into your head, and it doesn't necessarily have to... It doesn't have to necessarily dictate exactly where you come from. So if I take the class Barbarian, most people assume, well, that's a background. You grew up savage. You grew up, in nature. You're not a civilized type of situation. But it can go the other